The Garden of Ether is an inhabited data center. More specifically, it's a cryptocurrency mine inhabited by about 20 to 100 people, depending on the time of year. The idea of inhabiting a data center is that the plan is defined by the machines who are constantly being shifted out. And so I wonder if social change could be piggybacking off the technological change. So I encompassed the whole facility in a fiberglass dome onto which is a projected virtual sky, whose seasons are defined by the computational powers of the servers within. The year started by studying NFT artists. NFTs are a technology that allows for the collection and thus trade of digital art, and has had huge funding from the blockchain movement, who in turn has been popularized by the NFTs as well. This is a movement defined by libertarianism, and it's a technology that poses a kind of fundamental challenge to the nation state. However, the lifestyles of both the artists and their patrons remain generic and completely dependent on the structures that they challenge. So this sort of friction between centralization and decentralization is at the heart of the project. I've looked at two case studies of two ancient societies that sort of, one is hugely centralized and one is decentralized. Firstly, there is ancient Egypt. Here we can see the Ram Museum, which is a giant grain storage hidden behind a temple, or sort of hidden inside a temple complex. From the plan, we can see that the majority of the space is used for the grain storage, which is inaccessible to the public. The mythology or the art or the architecture serving as a kind of propaganda for the material power and the supreme rule of the pharaoh. However, more importantly is that the lifestyles of the artist making the mythology is defining the empire itself. So we've had 4,000 years of mass production of art and architecture remaining largely unchanged. So the artists live in a village called Deir el Medina, neighboring the Valley of the Kings. This is a village which has been designed by the sort of emergent architect. It is a typology which is not created by the inhabitants, but is designed by someone else. And this is the first time in human history we see something like this. In stark contrast to this is the ancient settlement of Neblivka, which, as you can see from the plan, does not feature a centralized power. In fact, we have quite the opposite, because archaeologists have found overlapping foundations suggesting that the houses were periodically burnt down in order to avoid the accumulation of surplus, which would eventually lead to the formation of an empire. And interestingly, they've found a great variety of pottery, where each household has a distinct style, suggesting that art had yet to be monopolized by the empire. So back to the blockchain. The biggest blockchain that supports NFTs is Ethereum. It works on a proof of work model where you have 3,000 nodes or server farms around the world, which are competing to validate the incoming transactions, because if you validate a transaction, you are paid for it essentially. And that happens through solving really labor-intensive cryptographic equations. Essentially, you burn energy in order to prove your trustworthiness. And so I propose to inhabit the world's largest Ethereum mine, which is located in the north of Sweden, which is a good site for data centers due to its cold climate and cheap carbon-free electricity. The project starts with the purchase of the Ethereum mine and the local hydroelectric power station. I removed the current timber structure and reused the foundations, which is now spanned or encompassed by the big dome. So the project is all about the shifting plan through time, which happens at two scales. Firstly, it's the year, where each year is not the sort of terrestrial year defined by the movement of the sun, but is a year, an ether year, defined by the servers of the facility, the lifespan of the servers. So the first year we see a kind of simple industrial rack, The second year is based upon Google's supercomputers, which are containers with glass cabinets allowing for access to the servers. And crucially, they're water cooled, which will have climatic consequences, adding a loss of humidity into the facility. And lastly, very loosely speculating on quantum computers, which would have a completely different climatic conditions. I'm focusing or each year is then subdivided into 4 seasons. I'm focusing on the second year, where you have autumn and spring being the 2 main political seasons, where spring is the installation phase that requires cooperation and a centralization of power. The autumn is the anarchic phase, where the servers are just slowly deteriorating. Summer and winter are festive seasons that mark the transitions between spring and autumn. The first season is winter. This is a time where the facility is cold, and because none of the servers are from the previous years are running anymore. In fact, when the last server shuts down, winter solstice is celebrated, and the star, the southern bit of the facility, shines light down through a tunnel at the southern end of the facility into the control room, allowing the newly elected monarch to descend down into the control room, where he can take charge of the whole facility. His reign starts with the ordering of this year's servers, and a ceremony is held where the first server is being installed, and the monarch can demonstrate the installation process. The community lives in planned housing typology in the middle of the space, neighboring these 2 fixed services, bathrooms and kitchens and gardening utilities, while the monarch lives in the southern bit, in a sort of more luxurious and private area. Spring is the season of where they install all the servers. The facility is slowly getting warmer. The monarch, who is in control of the control room, is in control of the sky and sets the daily cycle, making sure everybody is synchronized to allow for the greatest collaboration. The space is divided into 3 zones. It's a agricultural bit in the north, residential in the middle, and the sort of palace complex, sort of leisurely garden in the south. We can start seeing slight hints of tyrannic forces, where you have the monarch electing a council, which are living in nicer housing, and also a sort of palace complex forming. Luckily, however, the reign is cut short with the arrival of summer solstice, which is when all the servers are installed, and the first server has started to deteriorate. And a ceremony is held where the first server is uninstalled and repurposed. This year it's turned into a sake bar. This festive season lasts for 2 weeks, and friends and family from around the world are invited to come and celebrate it with them. All the servers are running at max capacity, so the whole facility is warm and humid, so people can sleep under the open virtual sky amongst the greenery. And a party is held along the strip with various signaling the coming sort of competitive season, with various events such as boxing competitions and esports tournaments and various activities happening along the strip. Autumn is a sort of leisurely season. It's when most of the work was done in spring. So people are slowly kind of watching the servers deteriorate, and they start inhabiting them and reusing them for various purposes, such as offices, different sort of living conditions and restaurants and such, and they're free to kind of organize it and experiment with their living. And some people are importing and exporting goods with the outer world. Some people are harvesting food and preparing food, and some people are producing art or performing art. And this experimentation during the season of the domestic situations is really crucial, because as we can see, the coming spring, where the monarch is planning the housing typologies, this experimentation will then inform the monarch's decisions in the coming spring. What I'm getting at here is that these 2 seasons are complementing each other. They're informing one another, and they're also sort of making sure that the worst of each one doesn't come to pass, so that the monarch is kept from becoming a tyrant, because he will be the peer of his subjects in the autumn, and the chaos of the autumn is sort of constantly being restored by the control during spring. And just to conclude, like zooming out from this project into kind of our wider political world, we're currently in what I would consider a long season of political stasis, where you have these two seasons completely merged into one another. Whereas I wonder if we were to keep them completely distinct, that we would see them sort of propping each other up, and also crucially allowing its subjects to experience two different types of political systems, which would give them greater political autonomy.